Hi, welcome back. And what we're going to do today is look at understanding thresholds. And we're going to tie in a lot of what we did with the wheel, where we talked about the ridiculously small no-fail goals. As I shared with you in each module, we're going to share an awareness, a tool, and then a transformation. So I'm going to share with you an awareness, a tool, or maybe a couple of tools, and some transformations that I want you to take away from the content in this module. So today it's going to be about specifically comfort zones, understanding your thresholds, and understanding really and getting deeper with ridiculously small no-fail goals. So first off, if we look at awareness, what I want you to take away is how we learn best. So when we are in any kind of a state other than a learning state, we're not learning at our best. And typically when we have horseback riding fears or fears in general, we're more in a survival state. And that's what I want you to be able to shift out of when you need to. So when we're in that survival state, what we're typically doing is we're getting into a zone, which I'll explain in a second, that is not helping us. And we're over some thresholds that we have crossed, and we might have consciously crossed them or unconsciously crossed them. And that's the key when we get into this conscious and unconscious confidence. So let's talk a little bit about the success with ridiculously small no-fail goals. So just a really quick review. A ridiculously small no-fail goal is just that. If, let's say, you haven't been doing any fitness, you haven't had any fitness goals, and you haven't been doing any fitness for yourself, and if I asked you to drop and give me 20 push-ups, it would probably be near to impossible for you to do it, and if you did it, maybe you'd hurt yourself doing it. So a ridiculously small no-fail goal would be something like asking you to do 2 push-ups on the wall 3 times this week. Absolutely guaranteed that you're going to get it done. And that's the key to this. It's not quantity, it's the quality, and it's the shift in the way that you do things and approach things that are the goal that we are looking to attain when we're thinking about ridiculously small no-fail goals. So let's go to one of my favorite tools, and that's the comfort zone target. And by now you should know already, I love targets, I love drawing targets. They're just wonderful ways to illustrate some of the things that I share as far as confidence is concerned. So if you focus your attention here to the center, we have 4 different zones that we're going to be talking about. So one of the things, I'm going to shift down here, one of the things that I want you to be able to take away from this is that success is not completing the goal, rather it's how fear-free you are while you are completing that goal. And that is the huge key, how fear-free you are while you are completing that goal. So remember when we talked about that bungee effect of going from 0 to 100 or 0 to the goal? We want to really stop thinking about that process at all in anything that we do, regardless whether it's riding or working with your kids or whatever it might be doing. So if we look at this, CZ stands for comfort zone. And when we're in our comfort zone, I think everybody already knows, when we're in our comfort zone, we aren't learning anything new typically. We're in a nice, comfortable place, and we're not expanding outside of what we could be doing. So if we look at expanding into our learning zone, and that's what LZ stands for, learning zone. So when we step outside of our comfort zone, we have to cross a threshold. Now, I've illustrated in my target one threshold here, which is this purple line. Understand that you could have many, 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 many thresholds before you get to this comfort zone. So I'm just going to illustrate that with a couple of little lines here, dotted lines, that represent literally, for some things that you're attempting to do, hundreds of micro thresholds that you might be going over. So you might already be really familiar with the concept of thresholds, and this is really important. Remember, I shared with you that the foundation of what we're talking about in the beginning modules, that were kind of heavily loaded with a lot of those foundational principles. This is one of them, and thresholds is a huge one. So when we are moving past a threshold, think about how you ask your horse to move past a threshold. When your horse is looking to cross a stream, let's say, and they're hesitating, you don't push them through that stream. You honor their threshold and you help them through it by allowing them to approach that stream and go away from it, and approach it and go away from it. And every time they approach it, they might be moving, let's say, their foot into it first because it's their nose into it first because it's nose, neck, maybe the feet. And that's something that long ago I learned from Pirelli. So if you think about them bringing their nose over that threshold, they feel comfortable with that while their feet are still in the comfort zone. And so that's something you'll see them do. The beauty of that is, and the beauty of the illustration of that, is that this is what I'm asking you to do. They're taking that step over that threshold into a new learning zone in such a minuscule way that their feet are still in the comfort zone and their nose is actually into the learning zone, or the beginning of the learning zone, crossing that little threshold. So that's a really key thing I want you to think about. So as you're moving from the comfort zone into the learning zone, remember, it might not be one threshold. In fact, I can guarantee you it won't. It's going to be several other thresholds that you go into. So we look at the learning zone. Now, the learning zone in and of itself also has many different thresholds and many different degrees of learning. And this is again where you're going to start changing some of your habitual patterns, okay? So when we look at these thresholds, or these zones within a zone, if you will, what we're looking at is you want to start on the close side of the learning zone in whatever it is that you're trying to do. If you blast from the comfort zone all the way out to here with the learning zone, you're already bringing yourself to an edge. You've already gone through way too many thresholds. You're really not doing yourself any favors. And one of the biggest things is you're looking more towards the goal as opposed to the journey that's going to bring you to that goal. And it's going to bring you to that goal fear-free, so that you're changing some patterns that you have in the past. So coming from the comfort zone, what I'm going to ask you to do when you start working on that is I'm going to ask you to start going from the comfort zone and just coming into that first layer of the learning zone. And then as you do that, you're going to experiment with all these other layers of the learning zone until at one point you are going to end up coming to the edge of the learning zone, the far edge of the learning zone. But all of this is positive. This is all positive work. This is all really good work. This is where I want you to be. I want you to play with. I want you to have fun with. This is where you get engaged. This is where things shift and change. What happens when you get into AZ, which is the anxiety zone? It's pretty simple. It's pretty self-explanatory. You get into anxiety. And so I want you to stay out of that zone for now. Right now, I want this to be your playground, okay? The PZ is panic zone. We're always going to stay out of panic zone for obvious reasons. We never want to bring ourselves into panic. We don't want our horses to be into panic. We talked about being in the survival and a learning mode. We are completely in survival mode when we are sometimes in anxiety and definitely always in panic. So let's talk a little bit about anxiety zone. So here's where I want you to do most of your playing, especially in the beginning. Especially when, think about your wheel goal when you want to move from, let's say, a 5 in your trot on the ground, a 5 in your trot inside the indoor to a 6 in your trot in the indoor. you're going to stay in the learning zone to do that. But let's say you're getting to a point where things are feeling really, really good in this learning zone, and you actually become excited at the prospect of moving from, let's use that example of the trot and the canter again. So let's say you're trotting in the indoor, and that's what you've been doing in the learning zone. Let's say you want to take that trot to the outside without a fence. And now, instead of it being something that creates anxiety for you, it creates more of an anxious excitement. And there's a key word there, excitement. So when you are excited about something, it's like standing on the edge and thinking about jumping down. And I'll use myself as an example. I think I've shared with you that I am afraid of heights, and I've worked very hard to deal with those heights. I've rappelled down a waterfall, I've done several other things, but something still that brings me out of my learning zone is jumping in the water from a height, so especially in a lake, and I love lakes, but even a 5-foot drop is a big thing for me to jump into. So for me, if I do that 3-foot jump over and over and over again, I'm going to be in my learning zone, I'm going to be playing in my learning zone. And at some point, what happens to me is I think, I think I can get to that 5-foot drop, and I think that actually is kind of exciting to me. That's where I want you to get to. I want you to start feeling the excitement and the fun in it, and the challenge in it, the personal challenge, as opposed to something that makes you anxious and afraid and brings you to that fear of, I want to leave the situation. So that is what we call the edge. So the edge is a great place to be, but you have to consciously go there. And we'll talk about that in a second. So when I consciously go to the edge, what I'm talking about is I'm talking about this right here. This is our edge. It's the edge between the learning zone and the anxiety zone, but it's a conscious decision to be there. So when we do that, we create excitement and we create more of a fun for us and for the activity that we're doing. So when we do this unconsciously, what we've done is we've gone through thresholds, we haven't honored them, and we've actually created a state of fear, even if it's not the type of fear that we are really conscious of, but there's enough of a state of fear there that from a physiological standpoint, we might stop breathing as well as we were breathing before. Our body might tense up a little bit more. Literally, from a physiological standpoint, there are a lot of hormonal shifts and changes, things happening in your brain. We'll talk a lot more about the physiology of fear later on, but those things might be happening at a degree that you're not even conscious about. So it's important to really stay on the edge consciously. What happens is we then have the ability to come out of comfort, be in learning, and go to the edge, and then make that conscious decision right away to say, this was fun, now I'm going to come back to the far edge of the learning zone. So what we do at that point is something that's really exciting, is we expand our comfort zone. So our comfort zone now, when we do any of this work in the learning zone, when we consciously move to the edge and allow ourselves to come back into learning, the far end of the learning zone, we then start to expand our comfort zone. And that is exactly our goal. Because eventually what we'd like to do is, remember, we want to be able to complete more things, more stuff, have more stuff. And we want to be able to do that without fear. And when we can do that without fear, basically what we're doing is we're expanding that comfort zone so that our learning zone, we can start to get really creative about the things that we want to learn. So with our comfort zone target, I think the thing that I want you to really focus on the most, especially in the beginning when we're first working on this week when you're working on this whole concept, is I want you to think about staying on this part of the learning zone, so more towards the comfort zone, And then just start to think about expanding it into the farther sides of the learning zone. And just start to think about the edge and how you might handle the edge. So what we're looking at again, if I explained the conscious and the unconscious confidence. So really, when I think about confidence and I think about when somebody tells me they're very confident with something, it comes from a place where they know what their abilities are. And in knowing what your abilities are, you have unconscious confidence about it. And so you're not even thinking about being unconfident. It just happens. It just flows. And when we are looking at reprogramming a lot of our habitual patterns that we have, the more that we can get into that unconscious confident state, the better we're going to be. So with reprogramming our habitual pattern, what I want you to take away from this, especially today, is those thresholds and the ridiculously small no-fail goals. Those two tools and staying within your learning zone are going to be key. So let's talk about the transformation. In other words, what I want you to be able to take away from this module and what I want you to be able to do for the long term is have permission to stay in the learning zone to grow. Now, many of us won't give ourselves that permission because for whatever reason, we might have a stigma attached to being in the learning zone. So if you have somebody who is the type of person who is very much a risk taker and they're not very risk averse, they might not understand. In fact, I can guarantee you, they're not going to understand what giving yourself permission to stay in the learning zone to grow means. What they're going to be doing is they're just going to kind of willy-nilly jump into something that they're doing, not really even looking at the risks that might be involved. Those people probably aren't in this course, so I'm just going to assume that you're the type of person who probably is a little bit more risk averse. And that's great, because remember, when we talked about fear, the whole concept that I'm trying to share with you is creating fear as a friendship as opposed to something that's a foe. So keep giving yourself permission to stay in this learning zone to grow. You understand better now why you want to do that? Definitely do it. Find your place of authentic, unconscious confidence. So I threw that word authentic in there. I want you to truly find your truth in unconscious confidence. What that means is that your truth is where you are comfortable, where you are, well, where you are beyond comfortable. You are learning and you are growing, and you're also comfortable in both of those arenas, if you will. And then lastly, I want you to be able to take this transformation and to use it in situations where you might feel self-judgment, which I think we're all very much our own worst self-critics. Many of us are. Negative self-talk that we have, which we're going to be talking about in one of the upcoming modules, our beliefs and our negative self-talk. And then judgment from others. So very often where we see a lot of these things come up is if we're riding in groups, if we are going into the show ring, if we are, I'll even give you an example. You know, I do a lot of horse camping, and right before you go out on the trail and you're getting ready to tack up and you're getting ready to get on your horse, very often there are other horse campers who are watching this whole process happening. And if you're not confident in what you're doing, or if you are questioning some of what you're doing, you're even going to have some periods of self-judgment, negative self-talk that might come up. You might feel judged by some of the other campers that are out there. There's nothing better than to be able to say, I really don't care what those other people think, and I really don't care what kind of self-talk is happening in my head. I can get that nice and quiet because I understand the most important thing, which is to keep both my horse and myself in a place where we can learn, we can enjoy ourselves, and we can have fun and be fear-free while we are doing it and getting to that goal. I hope you enjoyed the comfort zone target. Like I said, it's one of my favorites. And as you move forward this week, make sure you stay within your learning zone. Thanks so much.